Have you ever wondered if what you're going through is depression, or something deeper, something that might actually be an awakening? Imagine this: you wake up one morning and the world feels dull, flat, drained of color. The things that once gave you joy feel meaningless. You're tired, unmotivated, and no one around you seems to understand what's happening inside. To many, this sounds like depression. But what if, beneath the surface, it is actually a signal that your soul is shifting, that something new is trying to be born through you? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who gave us concepts like the shadow and the collective unconscious, believed that not all breakdowns are the same. Some collapses really are depression, psychic energy stuck, pulling you down into hopelessness. But others, though they look similar, are awakenings in disguise, painful but purposeful experiences that strip away old illusions so a deeper self can emerge. He warned us not to confuse the two. Because while both begin with suffering, one leads to paralysis, while the other leads to transformation. In this video, we'll explore Jung's perspective on depression and awakening. We'll look at how each manifests, why they often feel identical at first, and most importantly, how to recognize the difference. If you've ever questioned whether your pain is a dead end or a doorway, this is for you. By the end, you'll see how Jung reframed suffering not as something to run from, but as a potential path to becoming more whole, alive, and authentic. Carl Jung's view of the psyche. To understand Jung's distinction, we first need to step into his vision of the human psyche. Jung saw the psyche as layered. On the surface is the ego, the I we identify with in daily life. This is the conscious self that makes choices, holds opinions, and relates to the outside world. But beneath the ego lies the unconscious, which Jung divided into two parts: the personal unconscious, where repressed memories and forgotten experiences live, and the collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of universal patterns and symbols shared by all humans. Jung's model of the psyche wasn't just theoretical, it explained why people suffer. Much of our struggle comes from the parts of ourselves we deny or repress. He called this the shadow. It includes traits we dislike, emotions we suppress, and desires we find unacceptable. When ignored, the shadow doesn't disappear, it festers and seeps into our lives as depression, anxiety, or destructive behavior. Jung believed the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection, and that wholeness requires us to integrate these shadow parts into consciousness. At the heart of Jung's psychology is the concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your true self by reconciling opposites within. Individuation isn't easy. It requires confronting the unconscious, meeting the shadow, and allowing old structures to die. And here lies the crossroads. When unconscious material surfaces, it can either drag a person into depression or propel them toward awakening. The outcome depends on whether the ego resists or cooperates with the deeper process of integration. Depression through Jung's lens. Jung viewed depression as the withdrawal of psychic energy, what he called libido, from its usual investments. Normally, energy flows into our work, relationships, hobbies, and goals. When depression sets in, this energy retracts. Suddenly, things we once cared about feel empty. We struggle to find motivation, and the world loses its vibrancy. This isn't just laziness or weakness, it's the psyche signaling that something fundamental is out of balance. For Jung, depression often arises when the life a person is living no longer aligns with their deeper self. Perhaps they've built a career that doesn't reflect their true passions, or they've stayed in relationships that no longer nurture growth. The unconscious refuses to support these old patterns, so energy withdraws from them. In a way, depression is the psyche's protest. It refuses to go along with a false life. Jung described this stage as similar to winter, barren, cold, and lifeless on the surface, but with potential for new growth hidden below. Yet depression becomes dangerous when the ego clings to what is dying. Instead of letting go of outdated ways of living, a person may resist change and collapse inward. This resistance blocks the reorganization of energy and leaves the psyche stuck in despair. Jung warned that without conscious engagement, depression becomes sterile, a cycle of hopelessness that offers no path forward. Unlike awakening, which moves toward renewal, depression traps a person in stasis. Awakening through Jung's lens. Awakening, while equally painful, is a very different process. It begins in much the same way, with loss of meaning, collapse of old certainties, and deep inner turmoil. To the untrained eye, awakening can look just like depression. But Jung argued that awakening is not the end of the road, it is the beginning of transformation. Awakening happens when unconscious material rises to the surface, demanding recognition. This may appear through vivid dreams, strong emotions, or sudden realizations that shatter old beliefs. Jung described this as the psyche reorganizing around a deeper center he called the self. Unlike the ego, which is narrow and fragile, the self encompasses the totality of who we are, both conscious and unconscious. Awakening is the process of the ego surrendering to this larger wholeness. Though awakening is painful, it carries a sense of forward movement. Energy that has withdrawn from old patterns begins to reorient toward new ones. A person may feel confused and overwhelmed, but they also sense that their suffering has purpose. Jung compared this to alchemy. The old self is burned away in the crucible of suffering so that a new, more authentic self can emerge. The fire is real, but so is the gold it produces. Why they feel so similar? One of the reasons people confuse depression with awakening is that both involve a withdrawal from ordinary life. In both cases, the person may lose interest in work, friends, or hobbies. They may feel exhausted, question everything, and appear distant to others. On the surface, these states are almost indistinguishable. The similarity lies in their starting point, the collapse of old structures. Whether it is a job, relationship, or worldview, something that once held a person together no longer works. Depression and awakening both begin with this loss. Both leave the individual disoriented, vulnerable, and often misunderstood by society. From the outside, it's hard to tell whether someone is sinking or transforming. The real difference is revealed over time. In depression, energy stagnates. The person feels stuck, powerless, and unable to move forward. In awakening, energy eventually begins to reorganize. Though the pain remains, it feels as if something is unfolding, a new direction, a deeper meaning. The outward symptoms may be the same, but the inner trajectory is completely different. The crucial difference. For Jung, the crucial difference between depression and awakening is direction. Depression pulls energy backward, trapping it in the past. Awakening redirects energy forward, reorganizing it toward wholeness. Both are uncomfortable, but only one leads to growth. In depression, the ego resists change. It clings to what is dying, refusing to release outdated roles, identities, or attachments. The result is paralysis. The person feels empty, hopeless, and stuck in a cycle of despair. Dreams may be flat, symbols absent, and there is little sense of movement. In awakening, the ego surrenders. Instead of resisting unconscious material, the person allows it to surface. This can be terrifying, as it often challenges cherished beliefs and familiar patterns. But this surrender creates space for transformation. Dreams become rich with imagery, synchronicities occur, and despite the suffering, there is a sense that life is gestating something new. Awakening hurts, but it also opens. Depression closes. Case examples and illustrations. Jung's clinical practice offers some of the clearest examples of how depression and awakening can look alike on the surface but lead to entirely different outcomes. One famous case involved a successful businessman who fell into deep despair. Outwardly, he had everything: money, status, and a respected career. But inside, he felt dead. He came to Jung believing he was depressed and possibly broken beyond repair. Instead of rushing to fix him, Jung asked him to pay attention to his dreams. Over time, symbolic images appeared, scenes of painting, creativity, and beauty. The man realized he had long buried an artistic calling beneath social expectations. By following these symbols, he redirected his energy into art. His depression lifted not because Jung cured it, but because he embraced the deeper self that was trying to emerge. On the other hand, Jung also encountered individuals who mistook collapse for awakening. Some patients would withdraw from responsibilities, isolate themselves, and claim they were undergoing a spiritual transformation. But their lives shrank rather than expanded. Their dreams offered no symbols of growth, only barren imagery or repetitive anxieties. For Jung, this wasn't awakening but regression, a retreat into fantasy rather than an encounter with the self. Awakening always demands integration into life. If the so-called awakening cuts someone off from reality, it risks delusion. Today, similar cases appear everywhere. People experiencing burnout often wonder if they are simply exhausted or if they are being called toward a more authentic life. Psychedelic experiences, too, blur the line. For some, they open the doors of perception and catalyze profound transformation. For others, they destabilize the ego, leading to confusion or even psychosis if not integrated properly. Jung's work reminds us that the difference lies not in the symptoms alone, but in whether the psyche is moving toward greater wholeness or sinking into paralysis. The role of suffering. Jung believed that suffering is never meaningless, though it may feel unbearable. He saw it as a messenger from the unconscious, forcing us to confront what we have ignored. Pain signals that the old way of living no longer works. Rather than being an accident or a flaw, suffering is the psyche's way of demanding change. Depression can thus be understood as a warning light, something in the inner world requires attention. But suffering can cut in two directions. If we resist it, repress it, or distract ourselves endlessly, suffering hardens into pathology. It becomes depression in the truest sense, a cycle of despair with no apparent exit. On the other hand, if we face suffering with courage, it can transform us. Jung often compared this to alchemy, where base metals are subjected to fire until they become gold. The fire burns, but it is the very heat that makes transformation possible. In practical terms, this means that when we suffer, we must ask not only, how do I stop the pain, but also, what is this pain trying to show me? Awakening begins when we listen to suffering rather than numbing it. This doesn't mean glorifying pain or denying medical help when needed. Instead, it means treating suffering as a teacher, one that, if approached consciously, can reveal hidden truths about who we are and what we need to become. Practical implications. So how can we tell whether what we're experiencing is depression or awakening? Jung would caution that the answer is never simple, but he suggested signs to watch for. In depression, life feels flat, stagnant, and hopeless. Dreams are empty or repetitive. There is no sense of movement. Awakening, by contrast, is painful but dynamic. Dreams carry symbolic images, synchronicities appear, and there is often a subtle but unmistakable sense that suffering is pointing somewhere. Even in the darkest moments, there are glimpses of meaning. Practically, Jung encouraged engaging with the unconscious rather than ignoring it. This could mean journaling, paying attention to dreams, or exploring creative outlets that give form to inner experiences. Therapy, particularly Jungian analysis, can help individuals interpret symbols and integrate unconscious material. Community is equally important. Depression deepens in isolation, while awakening flourishes when shared with supportive others who can witness and ground the process. Above all, Jung insisted that we must resist the temptation to shortcut the process. Our culture is quick to medicate, distract, or rush through discomfort. But the psyche doesn't work on quick timelines. Transformation is slow, often painful, but profoundly rewarding. The implication is clear: if you find yourself suffering, don't ask only how to escape it. Ask what it might be asking of you. This shift in perspective can turn depression into the seedbed of awakening. Criticisms and limitations. While Jung's framework is deeply inspiring, it is not without criticism. Modern psychology rightly warns that clinical depression can be life-threatening. Romanticizing it as a spiritual awakening may discourage people from seeking necessary medical treatment. Antidepressants, therapy, and psychiatric support save lives every day, and no framework should replace professional care when symptoms are severe. Another critique is that Jung's language, filled with archetypes, symbols, and alchemy, can feel vague or unscientific. Concepts like the self or individuation are hard to measure. Critics argue that they function more as metaphors than empirical explanations. While metaphors can be powerful, they risk being interpreted in overly mystical ways, which can lead some people astray. Still, Jung's insights continue to resonate because they capture dimensions of human experience that strict biology cannot explain. Many who have suffered depression describe it not only as a chemical imbalance but also as a crisis of meaning. Jung's framework gives voice to that deeper dimension. The most balanced approach may be to integrate the best of both worlds, acknowledging the medical realities of depression while also honoring its potential symbolic and transformative significance. Conclusion. Depression and awakening often appear identical from the outside. Both involve suffering, withdrawal, and a collapse of old certainties. But Carl Jung urged us to look deeper. Depression is psychic energy stuck, leading to paralysis. Awakening is psychic energy reorganizing, leading to growth. The difference lies not in the pain itself, but in the direction it takes. For Jung, suffering was not an enemy but a doorway. If faced consciously, it can open us to the deeper self, leading to greater wholeness and authenticity. If resisted, it can harden into despair. This is why he insisted we must treat our darkest times not just as medical problems to be erased, but as meaningful experiences to be understood. So if you find yourself asking, "Am I depressed?" or "Am I awakening?" know that you are not alone, and that the very act of asking may be a sign of life stirring within you. Depression closes, awakening opens. The challenge is not to escape suffering, but to walk with it, listen to it, and let it guide you. Because sometimes, what feels like the end is actually the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be.